You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, good to be back with you again. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, and I'm your host, Steve Adams, on Mighty Blue. This week, I should be in Hot Springs when you listen to this, with a few listeners helping out where we can. I'll tell you about it when I return. That means I've had to rush around a bit to get this week's episode to you all, but I can assure you that it is a story that you'll want to hear and one that will likely stay with you for some time. One of my listeners, and now my friend, Hugh Ickrath, pointed me in the direction of today's guest, and to be frank, I wasn't really prepared for what I heard. This guy has a searing story that everybody should listen to. The fact that he's the featured character in a movie on the Appalachian Trail, coming out this week, should give you some idea of how important his story is. His name is George Eshleman, and he was known on the trail as Keeper. You'll find out why he got that name, and he opened up to me in ways that must have been quite difficult for him. George will be on shortly. Then, with no middle section today, we have the first half of Chapter 13 of Emily Leonard's book, Happy Hiking. This time, Emily's found the ponies. So, that's the show today. It'll be a little bit shorter than usual, mainly because I'm away this week, but I'm sure it'll be one of the stories that you'll remember for some time. So let's meet George and hear why he became the Keeper. Well, today we've got a bit of a first for the podcast. Our guest is George Eshleman, or Keeper. Hey, George, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, when I say it's a bit of a first for the show, George is the first guest we've ever had in more than 400 episodes who's featured as the main character in a movie on the Appalachian Trail set to be released on Prime Video this week, I think. Now, unlike Bill Bryson, George is not played by Robert Redford in the movie. But George, you told me earlier that the guy who does play you nailed it. And I know that you wrote the manuscript for the movie, but how involved were you in the making of the film and how much input did you have? And were you there when it was being filmed?
Yeah, I was. Angus Benfield is the director, producer who played me. I was there all 22 days of the film shoot, and they were very open, all the way to the point where Angus and Kenny, the other producer, said, if you see anything that we're not living up to expectations of what you experience on the trail, let us know. We'll shoot whatever. And I didn't have to interrupt them. They nailed everything. And it was just, they kept pretty much word to word to the script, where, I mean, when they were acting, I was mouthing their lines. So that's how close they were to the script. But yeah, I mean, it was all 22 days, and I just sat back and watched the magic happen. These people can do with words.
It's wonderful. I actually watched the movie this morning, about 3:30 this morning. I couldn't sleep last night, so I was watching it this morning. And I can imagine watching yourself on screen, particularly with such an intense subject, let's say, and we'll talk about what it is in a minute, must have been kind of almost otherworldly. How did you feel seeing yourself portrayed up on the screen?
The first couple of times I watched the movie, it was really hard for me to watch. I thought that, seeing how they made movies was going to ruin movie, watching for me, but it didn't. It made it a whole lot better. But I guess it was more difficult for me to watch the first half a dozen times because what they were acting out is what I lived. And it kind of put me back into the same place I was all those years ago. And even to this date, I've got an event coming up that they're showing the movie to somewhere 1,000 people. I'm going to be there at the event, but I'm not going to watch the movie. I'd rather watch it, to come from my own home, away from people. Sure. Because, it's a powerful, hitting movie, and I believe every veteran that sees it is going to come up with the same thing.
So you kind of hinted at it then. So for our listeners, you may be wondering why George is a main character in a movie. And that's the story we want to tell today. So, George, tell us about how you got onto the trail and why you were given the trail name of Keeper.
Oh, I'd always hiked. Well, me and my friend, we were always outdoors, but my best friend Shannon shot himself in April 2015. And that was, I guess, the turning point that the switch just, flipped. And I made a commitment I was going to carry his name tape up to the top of Katahdin and leave it there. Sure. And what people didn't know is that I planned on taking my life on the trail. So it was as morbid as it sounds. I planned it out for 4.5, 5 months, knowing what I was going to do.
Wow.
And that's a bad place to be. Yeah.
Yeah, but hadn't you and Shannon talked about doing the AT together, which I presume meant to do the whole hike together? But his death obviously made that change in your heart, I presume.
Yeah, well, we were friends since 9 years old, and I forgot what we were watching, but it was back in the late '80s. There was something about the AT or the CDT, Continental Divide Trail, and we had wanted to hike. Go on one of those long hikes, kind of like a journey, not a journey, but an expedition, when you're young like that. And the AT always just stuck in our heads. And we had hiked a couple of portions of it, nothing more than a day hike or a couple of days, not like a section or anything at the time. And it was where I wanted to go to basically leave, just to walk off Earth. And I couldn't figure out any other better place that I could get away from people, and I guess feel bad or sorry for myself, if that's a good way to say it. And so, I saw the most beautiful place in the world and went to it.
So, and you were in the military, apparently from 1988 to 1992, which I guess took in Desert Storm. What did you do in the military?
I was in artillery. I was a forward observer. And so, it's, for roughly 42 days, we were, fighting the third largest army in the world. And, it's living in the desert. It's, everybody has different combat experiences, but, I saw worst man can do to man, and I participated in it. So, I'll answer for those things when I get to heaven, but.
What's the worst thing then, George? Is it seeing what the worst things that man can do to other men, or is it the fact that you participated in it?
I'm Catholic, and my morals, I have high morals, and I guess there's something called moral injury. And it's when you go through stuff, it takes a couple of years until you get out to kind of look at yourself in the mirror and go, wow, I'm that person. I can actually do that to another person. Sure. And you don't feel bad about it when you're doing it, because you got your family around you, your brothers or sisters, you got your, and it takes a couple of years to get out for PTSD really to set in. But it's, like I said, it's, I'll answer for everything I did when I get to heaven, but right down here, I got to deal with it. So, the best way I know to do is, get on the trail and hike and medication, I guess.
So, I've had such a sheltered life, I must say. I've done lots of things in my life, but nothing like you've done. And frankly, I'm glad I haven't. And I know that PTSD means something different, I'd imagine, to virtually every person who's diagnosed with it. But can you explain what PTSD feels like to you specifically?
Like I said, impending doom, where you're always so alert, so on guard, and it's for the most part you can keep a wall up and you can guard against that. But after you do it for so many years, and it gets worse and worse, that when that wall does come down, it's 10 times worse than what it was before. And you keep doing that over and over again. And the more you self-isolate and get away from other people, where initially you feel better because you're running from things, you're trying
Sure.
to get into a secure, quote, secure spot in your head, that it just makes it worse. So by the time you end up like me on the trail, you've gone to your end. You're done. You're just ready to, quit the dreams, quit the thoughts, quit the sadness, the depression. You're just ready to say, I'm done,
But this, once again, I don't know the scope of any of these things. So, please forgive my stupidity. I have to say that to many people, actually. You served from 88 to 92. You left the military in 92. What did you do after that? Were you managing PTSD at that stage? I mean, what was your life like after 92?
Well, let's see, 90. Toward the end of 93, I started driving trucks, and a lot of veterans will do that because they're self-isolating. They're getting away from things and don't have to deal with people a whole lot. So I did that until 97, and I met Rhonda, my wife, and she literally saved my life. I always say, even in the movie, she kept me vertical. Her father had PTSD from Vietnam, and her cousin hung himself. And so she understood what was going on, and she just had that magical thing about her that was, wow. Yeah, she was an angel, and he no doubt sent her down there.
She kept you vertical, as you said, which is a great way of looking at how somebody's impacted your life. And while we're, this is not always going to be entirely grim conversation, by the way, because there are some funny aspects of this film which I want to come to as well. But in my mind, when we first spoke, which is only a few hours ago now, but I knew that there were about 22, 23 suicides of veterans a day. And so, is this a number that's rising? Are we getting on top of this, or what's the progress of this?
22, I'd say they're calling that their average, obviously, but it's a few more than that. To be honest with you, a lot of deaths are not considered suicides, like a single car accident, no skid marks. The guy had financial problems. Well, he had to have financial problems because he had PTSD. He had marriage problems because he had PTSD. So it all pretty much, they go back to it. So, but yeah, 22 a day, they say, I guess it just because it rings better. But I've always said there's a lot more of them than just those.
And you mentioned you've been a hiker for some years and you wanted to go with Shannon, but then Shannon killed himself. And your wife is depicted in the movie when you call home a few times, which I thought was interesting as well. And knowing that you had PTSD and knowing what PTSD was like for members of her family, how worried was she that you were heading out into the woods alone?
She was a strong lady. She was scared to death. I know that. It was kind of like...
And she didn't know... I'm sorry. And she didn't know what you planned, had she?
Oh, no. No, she didn't know until she read the screenplay.
Oh, really? Oh, my God. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And that I won't say which one, but there's a phone call there that she didn't know how right she was on that phone call That's day right. After I tried that behind the tree.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, it's,
And this is a difficult thing for me to ask questions about because I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that this is an emotional subject for you anyway. But we're going to get some good out of this, I think. And by the way, just to get more flow from the movie, I just want to let people know it's shown as a Sobo hike from Katahdin down to Georgia. But you actually split it up a bit. So tell us about what the hike was actually. So when did you start and when did you finish the first part, and then what happened after that?
All right. I'd started in September hiking south, which is basically far too late. Obviously, it's the end of the hiking season. Sure. I made it to Vermont, where I just had summer clothes, and that's not a good time to be in Vermont with summer clothes. So yeah, I had to come back home, and in about, I guess, maybe 5 or 6 weeks, drove up to Dahlonega, Georgia, and started my northbound on January 15th. And made that full through hike there. Ended up June 10th on Katahdin. Then turned around and walked home from Maine back to Georgia to Stone Mountain, down the roads and highways and stuff.
That's amazing. Did you enjoy the return journey on roads and were you actually on highways?
Yes.
Wow. Yes. Did you enjoy that?
Uh, Not as much as the trail, but I enjoyed it because in my eyes, so many people were seeing what I was carrying,
Sure.
and that's these, so you can see them.
Yeah, I saw them in the movie. They're remarkable. And we're going to
Yeah.
talk about those because
Yeah.
in fact, we'll talk about them now, actually, because when you decided to go after Shannon's death, you chose to take his name tag in his honor. And then I think this is more of a throwaway post on Facebook, I see, from our conversation. What happened when you announced that that's what you were doing, taking your friend's name tag on Facebook?
I didn't realize I had that many followers because all of a sudden, friends who had veterans that knew someone who committed suicide, they started asking or requesting I carry their name tape or their son or daughter's name. And so, yeah, I said, sure. And I got to write them down and getting them made. And they're $3.75 a piece. And I had to stop at 363 because that's all the money I had. The rest of it was basically for my flight. And I didn't need much more than that because I wasn't going to come off the trail. But yeah, it spread out, and I believe I got 1,200 still written down in a book that I haven't made into name tapes. I just can't bring myself to do it. And every once in a while, I'll get a message from somebody that wants to know if I'm still carrying names and stuff like that. And what I do is if I go on a section hike, I'll take a couple of dozen of them with me that are just written down in a book. But yeah, I can't bring myself to make any more name tapes.
But you know what, George, I watched as that film unfolded how the emotional weight that you were carrying was quite. I mean, the 5 pounds in weight is way too much extra to be carrying for any hiker, as you probably know by now. But the emotional weight must have been heavier and heavier as you went on. And the movie opens actually in Millinocket the day of your Katahdin summit. When we see you get a mailbox from home, which I presume you'd mailed yourself. Tell us what was actually in that box.
It was a brand new Glock 17 with one black Talon round in it. And not in it loaded, obviously, but it was, had one black Talon round with a brand new Glock 17, never been fired. And that went into my backpack in the Appalachian Trail Hostel, the AT Lodge here in Millinocket. And like I said, I was already committed. I knew what I was going to do. And I wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared. And that's a scary part of having PTSD. And when you get that far down, that you're not scared. You're not nervous. It's more of a relief. Like, if you imagine paying all your debt off, and you're just out of debt, that great feeling, that's kind of, the feeling that it was for me. It was like, finally, I put up this for so long and I'm done, and obviously I didn't do it, and that's some good reasons.
Yeah.
That gun.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to give the whole story away, obviously, but I had to mention the gun, obviously, as well. But didn't the fact that you were carrying these 363 name tags, which weighed at 5 pounds, along with the families who'd asked you to carry the loved ones' name tags, give you pause before that scene with the gun? And before you answer, when we talked about it earlier, you gave quite a stark reason how you were feeling at the time and what your mindset was at the time. So tell us about that, because, it must have meant so much to you to be taking those name tags, but you still knew you were going to kill yourself. So what was your mindset?
And as bad as it sounds, the names were just something on my side from the time I sat down in that tree. By the time I got up from the tree, they were more just names. But I think when I told you'd ask why the pistol was in my chest, and I said because I know my mom would want to have an open casket, and I couldn't park one in my brain pan. So, but that's the irrational thought that goes through someone's head that is in that dire situation. I call it the 8-second gray area, because in that 8 seconds, if something can happen to you, if something can snap you out of it, it will scare you so much that you won't really try it again. And I like to think that. I mean, I've had depressed stuff I've never attempted again. I've had some episodes, where VA took care of me for a while, but yeah, I mean, it's, I always tell people, would you walk into your your living room and tell your wife, hey, honey, call the cops in 10 minutes. I'm going to shoot myself. No, you wouldn't do that because you don't want to hurt her. You don't want to hurt your kids. So if they can keep that in their mind, that, you're running away and you're escaping your demons, and you're about to lay a whole bunch of stuff on these people. And that's what I thought. I was going to lay all these on these families and the devastation that would have caused them to know that their loved ones were in my lap when I did that. So all that emotion floated in, and it was kind of an epiphany. And I was just, thank God I was on the AT, because it is a magical, spiritual place. And I don't think anywhere else would have saved me.
Well, I'm not going to ruin some of the great little turns in the film. And so I don't want to take anything away from the film. I want people to watch it. But suffice it to say, quite clearly, you didn't kill yourself. Did you ever get that feeling again while you were on the trail? Or was that moment a sufficient epiphany to keep that thought out of your mind?
It was enough to keep it out of my mind. I still had, like I said, episodes, but it was kind of strange. When I was on the trail, they weren't as bad as when I'm off the trail. So even though I had bouts of depression and anxiety and stuff while I was on the trail, that was my outlet, and that's what kept me alive. So it was kind of like taking, extra medicine, which is the trail. So I just had more of a mission to get home to see my wife, because that's what she kept saying, are you coming home?
Yes, I know she did. That was very poignant listening to that. Yeah, I mean, and she wasn't sure whether you were. So she must have suspected something was going on. And as you were carrying so many tags, they're just a word. There are just a couple of words, rather, but they're much more than that, clearly. Were you able to get behind many of the stories behind those name tags? And did you learn more about these people?
Yeah. I always tell people, sit me down, give me half hour, I can write every name down. I know them by heart.
Wow.
I probably know 30% of their stories, backstories, and say maybe a dozen of them. I've already met the families. And there were a few names, because I'd heard the people's stories, like Sophie Shampoo, who is played by Haley Babula. Her children's Peanut.
She was awesome, Peter. Absolutely awesome in the film.
She was. And, but yeah, just from learning how those people were, that's why I wrote them into that character, because that was, Oh, and the monkey that you see in the movie is the actual monkey Sophie carried in Afghanistan.
Oh, gosh.
So, and the backpack, that's the original backpack I carried. And it's a lot of stuff in there.
That's so cool. Now, I don't want people to think that this is an entirely grim film, even though, the fact that the subject is very intense. But you also had an incident in a privy one night. Now, what interview is complete without a privy incident? Tell us what happened.
Well, they'll see it in the scene, but I'll tell you what actually, I got to the shelter, and it was so crowded. It was in Pennsylvania. And I usually tent, when it gets that crowded and stuff, because there's always someone's going to snore. And so I went ahead and laid all my pack stuff down, and I went to the privy, which is, everybody knows it's maybe 40, 50 yards away. And so I get in there and I shut the door. I have a little red light on, and, just about to, all of a sudden it sounded like somebody knocked on the door, and I said, occupied. And they knocked again. And I said, I'll be out in a minute. It's only one spot, and then I hear in the distance, get away, bear, get away. They're screaming at this thing, get away, bear. And I kind of lean and look through the little crack, and it's a bear. It is a black bear. And
I think it's at that point I would definitely have done my business straight away.
Oh, no, you believe me. Everything tightens up at that moment. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to go for a while, but they finally scared the bear away, and they allowed me to get into the shelter. Or they told me to get in the shelter. You might want to stand here. So I crawled all the way in the back, and I'm 5'11", and I fit in like a 2 foot by 2 foot area. I was way back in the back. I was like, he's going to eat through all these people. He's going to be too full to eat me. So there you go. I'm way in the back, but yeah.
So were you, or indeed your wife, able to recognize what the trail was doing for you at this stage? Because, the days pass, you get to 40 days, 80 days, 100 days, 144, I think it was, something like that. Did you know what was happening? Did you feel something happening to you?
I did. And yeah, I mean, and she did too. What she saw was I had a purpose again. And being a veteran and a soldier, we always had a purpose, to a reason to wake up every morning. My purpose and my reason was to get to the end of the trail, to make something of these names, to not let them just die and be forgotten.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she could sense that in me when she talked to me on the phone and stuff like that. But again, she was still, in the back of her mind, she's like, I've seen you go like this, good times, bad times, good times, bad times. And it's almost like being deployed and your wife's back home, not knowing if she's going to get a call or a chaplain's going to show up at the door. So
I'm sure
she had to go through that experience too. And, but yeah, she'd see a difference in me, and I certainly did.
And I remember when I was hiking the trail that the nights, especially when quite early on, when you haven't got used to sleeping in the woods, they can be very long when you're unable to sleep. Does that exacerbate the PTSD, or did you actually find some calm in the nights? Because it's a beautifully deep, dark time, isn't it, in terms of darkness outside?
Yeah. Oh no, that's probably one of the best times of my hike, is when you get to lay down. And I've got tinnitus from artillery, obviously, and a little ringing in the ears, but just to lay down there and you can start hearing insects or even the chipmunks running around outside your tent, bouncing off but it's almost like music. You hear the leaves blowing, you hear the wind blowing, you hear things crackling. It's almost like a music out there, and you just drift off to sleep. And when you wake up in the morning, it's much better than waking up in a bed, because out there you wake up and you open your eyes and you're like, wow, I survived. Yeah. Nothing ate me.
Yeah. I didn't die last night. Yeah. How cool is that? And as I mentioned earlier, you actually finished your main through hike on Katahdin. Tell us about that day and the emotional weight you must have felt when you were carrying those name tags to the top, because this was what your goal actually was, wasn't it? So what was the day like for you? Was it emotional?
Yeah. I mean, again, I was by myself, so I didn't have a lot of people, but I did have probably a good couple of dozen people that took pictures of them holding the name tapes, because they thought it was pretty neat. But yeah, it was. When I got to the top, I took the picture on top of the Katahdin sign, and then I kind of walked off where nobody was and just sat on a rock and looked out. I looked down going south, and just it was an internal smile, but it was also sadness, because I was thinking, okay, well, now what? What do I do now? I didn't want to stop. And I think that's why I walked home. And then still to this date, I keep walking. I've already finished my third. The last through hike I did was sections, did 3 sections to finish. Right. So it's 3 of them, but I've hiked hundreds of miles on it, just in different portions here and there. But yeah, getting out there is what saved me once. And I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I'm keep getting out there.
Yeah, damn right. Actually, that was going to be one of my questions. Were you glad it was over, or did the thought of returning to real life concern you? But it is that what's next? What am I going to do now sort of thing? Because it's occupied your mind. It's been your goal, constant goal for a period of time, and it's over. And this doesn't have a really happy ending, unfortunately, because sadly your wife passed from cancer several months after you'd finished, I believe. Obviously, that was incredibly difficult for you. How did you cope with that?
We all knew she was going to pass away, and to tell you what kind of woman she was, we didn't know she had stage 4 for 3 years. Well, stage 3. Oh my
gosh!
She was sick for 3 years with terminal. They knew she wasn't going to get a liver, and we started seeing her kind of going downhill, and that's when she came out and said, "I got something to tell y'all." And I was upset. I was like, "What? You've had this for 3 years like this? You've been going through this stuff?" And she goes, "I didn't tell anyone because we had a beautiful 3 years." She didn't want to hurt anyone else, have them worry about her. And that's just and so that's the woman that kept me alive. But when she had passed away, she left notes in the house for people, me and my sons. And one of the biggest one, the main letter for me was, "I love you, go to the VA." That's all it said. And right then and there, I knew that she knew that if I didn't get help, that I'd be next, that I would go, because she wasn't there to hold my hand anymore. So yeah, and I owe it to her to stay alive. I mean, she worked so hard to keep me breathing, and I don't want to go up there by, committing suicide, meet her up there because that wouldn't be good.
Of course, she'd give you a hard time then, wouldn't she?
Oh, she'd tell St. Peter just build a house outside of heaven and let him watch everybody else come in.
She'd kick your ass.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to take you back to that moment because I've been very careful not to give away too much of the film because I want people to watch it. I think it's important that people understand what's going on. But we've talked about the moment with the gun pointing at your heart because you didn't want your mother to see you in an open casket, with your face all smashed in. Have you thought back to that moment often and why you chose to pull back from killing yourself so early in your journey? I mean, I know you knew that was what you planned to do, but what was the catalyst can you think back to exactly what it was at the moment?
What, that stopped me from doing it?
Yeah.
I'd say the flood of emotion of everyone that I'd met. And then a lot of times the veterans and even civilians, and I always include civilians in mental health issues, is that you feel like you're alone, that you're going against things by yourself and you got to fight it alone. And that was the epiphany I had. It's like, I'm not alone. All these families that gave me their names, I'm about to dump all this on them. Old man and navigator at the Appalachian Trail Lodge, it was going to affect them. The search and rescue guy, who was a real person, Chris, in the movie, there's a guy who plays search and rescue. And just all these other hikers that I met up to the shelter that I was at, when I walked off behind the shelter, all these people, and it's like, wow, you're not alone. And I think I cried more there in probably my entire life because I sat there for a good 20, 30 minutes and I couldn't stop crying. But it was a kind of a oh wow moment, eureka moment. That's why the tears were coming. And again, it wasn't a cure-all. It didn't fix everything. But wow, it made it a whole lot better knowing I'm not alone. And that's, so I mean, that's what kept me from doing what I did, what I was going to do.
So you got back home and you'd kept a journal while you were out there. Did you, I not even thought about this. You told me you kept a journal, that's right, didn't you?
Right. Yep.
But did you start the journal after you decided not to shoot yourself, or had you started the journal before that?
I started the journal, I think I was in New Jersey when I started.
Okay. That makes more sense because, starting a journal knowing you're going to kill yourself a few days later probably wouldn't have been the best way to have a journal. But you've got a journal. So where did the idea for a film come from? Because I know you actually wrote the manuscript. What was the process?
Well, Rhonda wanted me to write, I guess, a book. I think you had mentioned that, but it was more of just a memoir, I guess. And when she read what I'd written, that's when she first found out that the dream she had was real. And she was mad, but she was also relieved, the same facial expression. But I finished it. I let a couple of dozen friends read it, and they were just blown away. They're like, man, you got to turn this into a movie. I said, I don't know how to do that. I'm from the foothills of the Appalachians. I don't do movies. Well, I put it out. And
don't sell yourself short. Don't sell yourself short. You've had an epic adventure, which meant a lot of things to a lot of people. That was clear from the film alone. But talking to you, I can see why it was. So don't sell yourself short. Just saying from the Appalachians. You had a story to tell. You really did. So what was the process? Yeah. What did you do?
I put on the internet to look for screenwriters, and finally there were no takers. And about a month later, I took it off the website, and about a month later, I get this call from a commander, Todd Tavolazzi, U.S. Navy active duty, and he said, "I don't know if I got the right number. Is this George? I'm a screenwriter." And I said, "Well, hey Todd, yeah, I need a screenwriter." And we talked about 2.5, 3 hours, and he was an active duty naval commander, flies Ospreys. I sent him what I'd written. It was about 92 pages. And the very next day he calls me. He says, my girlfriend and I just sat down and read this, George. We need to make let me do a screenplay. I said, have at it. So he if it wasn't for him, it wouldn't be a movie. It would never been made. But he turned the screenplay, and Angus Benfield somehow got his hands on it. And he was amazed no one made the movie yet in Hollywood. He's like, no one's picked this screenplay up. It didn't take him but a moment to option it. And then, they were asking, well, what does George want for his story? And I think I told you that I signed my life rights over. I didn't get anything for them because it's not my story. It's all their stories that people I carried. And, I can't write a check to each one of these 363 families. I think it better played off that these people live on forever in a movie. But yeah, and then Angus, it took about, I guess, a year and a half for them to do pre-production. And the hardest thing was to get the West Coast crew on the East Coast to get on a trail that they've never been on.
I'm sure.
Going through 5 different states, all the permits, all the insurance, everything, and do it all in 22 days. And it was amazing to watch. It's Steve Lafferty, who's the first AD. He says, directing a movie is like trying to herd cats. But it works. And I'd asked a couple of times, I was like, does that ever go this smooth? Is this, no, it never goes this smooth.
Nice.
But yeah, it everything just works just perfectly. And they did amazing with the actors they had. And Angus being able to grab my mannerisms in the beginning of the film where he's reserved and a little shy and, not really knowing, what he's doing, to progressing into a hiker. And by the time he gets to Springer, he's got that swagger.
Absolutely.
He's got that walk in his hips, and he's now a hiker. And it's just the way he was able to bring that out and really on a lot of his facial emotions, like the flashback scene, that veterans that have seen the movie have asked, is he a veteran? I was like, no, he's an actor. He's not a veteran. Like, wow. Because he had that look in his eyes where it's just dead stare. And so yeah, I mean, he was just amazing. They're all amazing. They're my family now.
I'm sure. And, it's a wonderful story. I've got one more main question I want to ask you, but I also want you to tell people what you've done with the name tags, because I know they're important to you. But when I asked you this morning, you said they're in the closet. So what do you do with them? I mean, do you look at them from time? Do you pick one out random and try to know their story?
I mean, like I pretty much I know all their names. They're a comfort to me.
Sure.
If I go on long trips, I'll put them in the truck with me, and I sat them in the passenger side seat. I put them in the back seat. But yeah, I mean, they're just, I guess and it sounds morbid. Rhonda was cremated and her ashes are here in the house, and that's my comfort. I don't want to have to go visit a cemetery or anything like that.
Sure.
I guess that's the same thing that as long as they're near me, then I'm okay. I know I can defeat anything with this many, friends and her watching over me. So but yeah, they're my security blanket.
So final question. Actually, no, before we have the final question, where can people, because I know this show's going to go out next Thursday, I think the 5th or the 6th of November. I can't remember what the date is actually. So this gets released, I think, on the 8th or something like that. How can people watch the film?
Go to Amazon Prime and look for The Keeper. It'll be out November 8th. Rent it. A portion of those proceeds go to help veteran causes, veteran foundations. Great. The most important part is just watch it and tell someone else to watch it, because whether you're a veteran or a civilian, everyone has walked through some bad stuff in their life, and you'll be amazed that once you get that epiphany like I did, that you're not alone. You don't have to cry on your friend's shoulder, but they're there. They'll listen to you, even just to listen. A lot of vets just want people to listen, and then that's it. We don't need a therapist. We just listen to us. And but yeah, I think when people realize that they're not alone, I'd love to be able to change the world like that. My dad always said it. If people can walk past your tombstone and say that person did everything they could to make this world better, doesn't matter how much money you had or how less money you had. So.
Well, you've actually answered my last question without knowing the question. And the question was going to be, what do you want people to take away from the film? And even from our interview, maybe, because you've said things that aren't necessary in the film and so on. Is there one takeaway you'd like? And I think it must be that there's always someone there to listen to you if you want to find them. Is that right?
Yep. And people have, they told me I was crazy for doing this, but it's been up there since 2015. It's my personal cell phone number on Facebook. I've been called by I don't know how many veterans, thousands.
Wow.
And some last 30 minutes, some last an hour. Longest was 7 hours, 35 minutes. And I picked the phone up at 9:30 at night. It was like 4 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning when we got off the phone.
Wow.
And it's just, my life is not that full that I can't spend 20, 30 minutes listening to somebody. Do I have the greatest advice? No. The best advice I can give you is, hey, I'm here next time you want to call me. Just stay alive that long and you can call me again and I'll always answer the phone. And there's always somebody out there. Everybody has somebody, and again, you don't have to cry on their shoulder. You don't have to sing Kumbaya on the fire. There's always somebody, because no one will ever look at someone who committed suicide and said, well, okay, anyway, move on. No, it's always why. Why did they do that?
Sure.
Why didn't they come to me? Why didn't they speak up? It's like, instead of asking why, ask what's going on. How are you doing?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was given a second chance out there, by the man upstairs and by his love and mercy. And that's the least I can do, is try to do my part of telling people you're not alone. Everybody goes through something,
Yeah. Amen to that. Well, look, I applaud you for being as open as you've been. I didn't know how to approach this really to start with, but you've been so open. And I just thank you for the story you've told and what you actually do, and taking it's a very, it was very emotional to see the people seeing those name tags and what it meant to them as well. So you're a keeper and a messenger for those families. But I'd like to thank you for coming on the show and sharing the story, and I wish you well.
Well, I appreciate you for having me.
Thank you, buddy. Take it easy, okay?
Uh-huh.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
As I said at the beginning, I watched the movie the day I spoke with him, and to be honest, it opened up further questions for me and allowed me to shape those questions for George. I think it's probably the interview I was most concerned with, given all the ones I've done in the past. I didn't want to tell the full story, nor some of the twists along the way, but I wanted to know more about George and why he'd done it. And I think it turned out really well. The movie is going to be available on Prime this coming week, so I want to suggest that you try to watch it. I've added the trailer to the show notes, as well as a few pictures of George and his name tags. He's been through a hell of a lot, but he seems to have worked out how to stay vertical, as he said. I'm sure you all wish him well. I know that I do. As I'm recording this just 2 days after the previous episode, I'm going to leave out my thank yous until next week, but always know that I love you supporting what we do here on the network. Now, Emily is having fun with the ponies in the Grayson Highlands. I'll see you next week. Chapter 13. Ponies, Bear and Cows. We left Damascus at different times on April the 21st. The kids needed to check on stuff at the outfitter. Ryan was heading home to Maine after he finished up one last interview with Walking Man and GQ. All I had to do was go back to the trail. Bruce walked with me to the north end of town where the trail disappeared back into the woods. He wasn't going too far after we said goodbye. He would be meeting me where the trail crossed Route 58. Everyone else would continue to the campsite just past the road crossing, and I would catch up with them the next day. The trail out of Damascus follows the Virginia Creeper Trail for a half a mile. When I first heard the name of this section, I was a little creeped out. My wild imagination took over, wondering how this trail got its name. Little did I need to worry. The name did not derive from some crazed lunatic. Rather, the 35-mile trail was a former rail bed from Abingdon, Virginia, following the White-Top Laurel River to White-Top, Virginia. It was a pleasant stroll on level ground for a morning stretch before my 16.7-mile hike. The hike that day continued to be easy. The terrain was rolling hills, easily climbed and descended. The only issue of the day was a detour I chose not to take. I came to an intersection where a sign posted on a tree read, "Northbound 80 hikers, bridge washed out half a mile ahead. Best route to continue on 80. I took a picture of the sign because there was no way I was going to remember the series of directions for the detour. Then I pondered the wording of the sign. It didn't say trail closed or detour. It merely read best route to continue. I interpreted this to be a free will choice. I wanted to be a purist and not miss any section of the trail. I noticed the time for reference and I went left instead of right. I hiked and did not come to a bridge. I hiked for 20 more minutes. The terrain was easy, so I was sure I had completed over a mile. After I no longer saw any blazes and the trail dead-ended, I decided to turn around. Retracing my tracks at the expense of another 20 minutes back to the sign, I chose to heed the advice of the notice nailed to the tree and went right. Free will is a wonderful gift. It is what distinguishes us from all other life forms. It is the root of our salvation. God sent His only Son to die for us. We are saved by that very act, but in order for us to take advantage of that salvation, we must choose to accept Him, and in doing so, by design, we will have eternal life with Him. Every day we're confronted with choices that will affect us, and when we are not sure which option to take, we have a great guidebook we can refer to, the Bible. Sometimes we think we have to figure everything out on our own, but all the answers have been provided for us if we just look at what is right in front of us. When we close our eyes to the truth, we may have difficulty in our lives we could not foresee. That day I chose not to heed what was right in front of me. I had the answer to the question, which way should I go? But in all my infinite wisdom, I thought I could do it my way. I was wrong and needed to retreat back to the sign for directions. God also works that way. When we insist on doing things our way and then fail, all we have to do is admit we were wrong and seek Him. He will then guide us the right way, His way. I made it to Route 58 with plenty of daylight left. A car was parked next to the road on the north side, but it wasn't Bruce. I found a spot as far off the pavement as I could safely sit and still be seen by oncoming traffic. The road was winding and narrow. I attempted several times to call and text Bruce. Poor cell service prevented any hope of communication. I sent a satellite text using the inReach, but had no reply from him. He probably lacked reception also. I waited over an hour and there was no sign of him. The campsite was only 3/10 of a mile in from the road, but I could not continue on because Bruce had my tent and sleeping bag. I was slack packing and regretting that choice. Another day of not having what I needed. The sun was setting and the temps were dropping. Thank goodness it was dry. I started to go into panic mode again, then realised I had been going into panic mode quite a bit on the trail, and it never helped. So I took a deep breath and decided to stop the next car that went by. It was not a busy road, and during the time I sat there, only one vehicle passed. I flagged it down and confirmed with the driver that I was in fact on Route 58. I sat and said a few prayers and started to devise a plan to sleep outside without my gear. Just as I had given up all hope that Bruce was going to rescue me, I heard a vehicle coming around the bend. Saved. Bruce finally showed up. I relaxed and jumped into the SUV. He had been worried about me and explained that the coordinates in the guidebook were wrong and had sent him to some other place. Luckily for me, Bruce is one smart cookie. He was able to figure out where I was and find his way there. We drove back to Damascus for the night. We did not rent a cabin or room, but instead slept in the back of the Ford Expedition in a parking lot. By April the 26th, I had made it to mile 566.5, 1/4 of the distance to Katahdin. I was having so much fun. I enjoyed my new life of hiking, meeting new people, and being in nature. The scariest part about the journey was not knowing what each day would bring, but that was also the best part. Looking back, I realised my panic times came from the lack of knowledge of what lay ahead, but this was also exhilarating. The panics were caused by poor planning, change of events, or both. It was in those times of despair I had to reach down inside and find that inner strength we all possess. If we want to harness that asset, we just need to follow the protocol for a fire. Stop, drop, and roll. When a situation gets heated or seems to be overbearing, we just need to stop. Stop talking, stop overthinking, stop feeding the fire with our negative thoughts and behaviours. Then we need to drop. Drop to our knees and pray for God's guidance. Pray for the direction and wisdom we need to put out the flames. And finally, we need to roll. Roll with confidence and conviction. Roll under the smoke and the flames. Don't stop rolling until we emerge on the other side and into the fresh air. One unexpected joy of hiking the Appalachian Trail was all the time I was able to spend with Bruce. During our initial planning, he was only going to join me on the trail about once a month to check on me. His work was demanding, making it difficult to take vacation. I had been gone almost 2 months, and we already had more dates than we had since our kids were born. His job allowed him to take his office on the road, providing he had internet and cellular service. So while I was hiking, he would find a place to work, then at the end of the day he would meet me. Bruce had joined me the last few days, delivering trail magic for my hiking family and me. Other hikers who just happened to be at the right place at the right time also reaped the benefits of his services. He would meet us at trail crossings with snacks and cold beverages. Sometimes he would hike southbound on the trail and meet me. It was an awesome sight to see him hiking toward me when I would least expect it. The tingling kept growing stronger each time I saw him. It was like our younger years all over again. I couldn't get enough of him, and not because he was delivering treats. It was because he was giving himself to help me succeed. The last several days have been exciting. I saw wild ponies in the Grayson Highlands of Virginia. I saw many deer. I slept in my tent through a raging thunderstorm. I survived hurricane wind gusts while on an open board. I saw very little sunshine. I celebrated Walking Man's birthday with him, met a friend from 25 years ago, and did not even know it was him until later. And I met a famous songwriter. Grayson Highlands State Park is located next to Mount Rogers National Recreation Area in Virginia. The park is located within Jefferson National Forest and is spread over 4,822 acres. For 2.8 miles, the Appalachian Trail wanders through Grayson Highlands State Park. The park is popular for hiking, camping, biking and horseback riding. It is home to the Grayson Highlands Fall Festival and weekly music jams. Hikers remember this splendid landscape mostly for the wild ponies that inhabit the hills. I was hiking with Walking Man through this section. He was 20 yards or so ahead of me when he stopped and waved his hand for me to quickly yet quietly come forward. It immediately reminded me of my youth while hunting with my dad. I would be following my father, and when he heard or spotted a deer, he would stop, raise his arm with a halt gesture, followed by the rapid flick of his wrist, waving me to his position. Walking Man did the exact thing. For a split second, I reminisced about those hunting days. I'd always loved the outdoors. I grew up with 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and Mum and Dad scraped out a meagre existence on an army pension and a teaching salary. So grand vacations were not heard of. Hunting and fishing were our thing. These did not require much money or travel since we lived in the woods. I just longed to go on overnights. Only the boys were allowed on such expeditions. I voiced my young opinion on this subject every time the annual winter snowmobiling and ice fishing trip came around, but I was left behind once again. I get the same excuse. It's no place for a young lady. When Bruce and I married, we bought a piece of lake frontage on Coldstream Pond in Lowell, Maine, with a view of Katahdin. We wanted to be on the water and close to the woods so that we didn't have to leave home to go on vacation. Recreation was outside our front and back doors. Bruce travels a lot for work, so when he had time off, he didn't want to go anywhere. Many times I would express a desire to pack up and go camping. This posed a couple of major challenges. First, Bruce didn't want to go camping, and second, we owned no gear. So I never pushed the issue hard and never went camping. Occasionally, we would set up the kids' small tent down by the shore and sleep in that on warm summer nights. Before I started my hike of the AT, I could count on one hand the number of times I actually slept in a tent on a site, not at home. Now here I was, living the dream after years of thinking it was impossible. When I reached Walking Man's spot, we could see several wild ponies on both sides of the trail. I pulled up my camera and videoed him calling one closer. We continued on. Up ahead were more ponies closer to the trail. We saw a young one, old ones, and a very pregnant one. The young one was more timid than the older ponies, but curious at the same time. With some coaxing and gentle pets, I was able to capture a selfie with him. Walking Man picked some fresh grass to feed the ponies. They very quickly grew bored with the offering. I had some oatmeal and they nibbled it from my hand. I remembered a bag of whole grain rice crackers in my pocket, and as soon as I pulled it out and opened it, the rustling sound of the packaging caused a mature pony to come trotting down the hill. He bullied his way through the herd to us, then the others followed in hot pursuit. We were surrounded by several of these creatures. I was rethinking my decision to feed them. They were just like our dog. Whenever you open anything in the kitchen, Barney's there waiting for his share. These ponies were not strangers to human interaction or processed foods. Once we passed the far side of this area, we saw signs instructing us to keep the wild in wilderness and not to feed the animals. Nice try, but I think it was a little too late for that. We were at Partnership Shelter near Mount Rogers Visitor Center in Virginia on April the 24th. This is the only shelter on the trail with a shower. With its location so close to the road, it also offered the luxury of pizza delivery. Bruce gave us a ride to town for resupply, and we secretly purchased a birthday cake for Walking Man. We celebrated that evening with everyone round a fire and, of course, pizza. A couple, Lefty and Righty, were section hikers also at the shelter. They were fun to converse with and tell stories. They were a nice addition to the party, especially since it was also her birthday. It was a full house that night. Since we were parked near the road, I slept in the SUV again with Bruce. I wanted to get an early start, as usual, and with the full house, our sleeping in the vehicle left more room in the shelter for others. Another long day was scheduled, 17.6 miles. Bruce would meet up with me for lunch in Atkins at the barn. I left as planned, and Bruce hung around helping other hikers. He gave Lefty and Righty a ride. Their section hike ended at Partnership. While Bruce was chauffeuring them, they chit-chatted, and the normal conversation of where are you from, what do you do, led to their realisation we all knew each other. Since everyone used trail names and it had been 25 years or so, plus and minus a few pounds with several grey hairs since we had last seen them, we didn't recognise each other. His name was Rich McDuff, a musician-entertainer we would see at a local bar in Bangor when we were dating. We were loyal fans and developed a friendship. Like all things, changes occur with time, and we went separate ways. It was such a nice surprise to meet them again and rekindle our friendship.